Welcome to the Money School Podcast, Weekend Edition. Today is Saturday, August 15th, 2020. Happy Saturday, everyone. I hope you had a good week and you're having a relaxing weekend and staying cool. It's hot pretty much everywhere around the country. Wanted to check in real quick about what's going on in the world of business over the last week and what's coming up over the next couple of days. By far the most interesting story going on right now is Epic versus Apple in the App Store. Apple took Fortnite out of the App Store because Epic, the maker of Fortnite, didn't want to play by all of the rules in terms of paying the fee, access to entry to get into the Apple distribution system. Google also has the same issue in terms of they have more of an open development marketplace, but they still take their cut of services, and how that is going to play out over the next few years and over the next decade or so. We're going to have some answers in terms of who owns this data and who has the right to control, just the gatekeeper status of some of these big tech companies. That's why over the last week, I've repositioned my portfolio out of some of the big tech companies that have more direct exposure towards the beach ball that will be, over the next 2 months of the campaign and all of that stuff. These are going to be agenda items that get punched back and forth, and I really don't want to be in the biotech pharma space or in any of the data privacy mega cap players. I think that there's other spots in tech that are better to be positioned in for the rest of 2020. On tomorrow's Patreon bonus episode, we'll go through all of the adjustments and trades that I made last week, and then also the trades I have coming up, my final adjustments to those position changes over the next week. I just think over the next couple of months, you're going to see a lot of these critical attack vectors for these major companies be put into the spotlight by politicians to, gain favor in a populist way, on either side of the aisle. It's really easy to rally, average Americans against these huge forces. And I think that you're going to see a big challenge in terms of how powerful these companies are, how much power we're going to give these gatekeepers to our access to information and platforms and data, and how that ultimately comes down to free speech. And, at the end, I think what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of heat come down on these tech companies in the short term, and long term, nothing will structurally change. And with the Apple and Epic showdown that's coming, I think you're going to see Apple win for a couple of reasons. The first being, Apple has between 13 and 15% of the overall smartphone market. That means, statistically, most of the phones and developers that, these developers are creating apps for are not on Apple. They're not on iOS. They're on Android. And Android has its own issues with this, but they are more open. And nobody's forcing these developers to make their apps for Apple. Apple has created an ecosystem that has a really valuable customer base, and people are loyal to the hardware. And if your app isn't on Apple, then, for the most part, that's going to be a loss for the developer. And as long as that dynamic remains intact, then Apple isn't going to risk their ecosystem over any one developer. And that's why you see Spotify and all these other major developers kind of pile in, because what's good for Epic is good for all of them. But at the end of the day, Apple will shut their app store down before they're forced to give up their golden goose. So I think that there's going to be a lot of noise in the short term, and that might be an opportunity to buy, but I'm not interested in that over the next couple of months. I think there's other areas that will outperform, and that's where I'm going to go. And again, there'll be more details on that in the Patreon tomorrow. The other important headline-making news is what's happening with Uber and Lyft in California and the reclassification of 1099 to W-2. I think this is also a really interesting legal battle that has widespread ramifications in terms of, how these employees, these people that are working and, operating for these companies, how they're treated. I see both sides of the story or both sides of the coin, and how a lot of these people that are Uber and Lyft drivers and working for Postmates and DoorDash, they like the flexibility of being 1099 and being able to, the freedom that provides. I fully understand that. The other part is, with these Uber and Lyft are getting by not paying into unemployment and, all of the other payroll taxes that go along with having employment workers, and the benefits and, minimum level of compensation that they're going to have to provide. Again, I think that these tech companies, they have the hearts of the consumer, and the government is fighting a lot of battles on a lot of different fronts, especially in California. And I think that if the government was to totally force Uber and Lyft out of service right now, I think that would be very unpopular heading into an election season. So I think you're going to see Uber and Lyft call the bluff of California. And they already kind of did that this week. The CEO of Uber came out and basically said, listen, if you're going to force us to do this, we're just going to shut down and you can deal with it. I think that this is the wrong time to fight this fight, and we're going to get some type of... I feel more confident in the Uber and Lyft situation that there'll be some injunction where they'll be allowed to continue to operate. And if not, I feel also as confident that Uber and Lyft will stick to the long term and take some short-term pain in terms of shutting down markets to say we're going to continue to operate this. The whole operation of Uber and Lyft in terms of the ride sharing goes is, they make a lot of money by not having to pay benefits and by the drivers depreciating their own assets. So just like Airbnb doesn't have any hotel or any real estate, Uber and Lyft, they don't have any fleet of cars that they have to worry about the value getting depreciated to zero, where these drivers are largely driving their cars until they don't work anymore. And when you start adding in all of the cost of those vehicles, these drivers really aren't making that much money. But that's kind of what the gig and on-demand economy is built on. And that's why people that are in those situations driving, professionally for those services, they need the flexibility to work for multiple vendors and piece together their income in a way that they can aggregate a way to live. And that's why they prefer to stay 1099, and why they don't want to go to Uber and then have to only drive Uber and be subject to Uber's regulations and oversight. So I think you're going to see the consumers demand that they want these services to continue and be provided to them, and then you're going to see the service providers themselves say, we're good with the situation that we're in, and you just need to not threaten our ability to earn income right now while the pandemic is still, in a lot of ways, really just getting started, especially for people that are on the margins that are using ride sharing and these types of services, gig economy jobs to supplement their income. Those are a lot of folks that are living on the margins. And if you cut that marginal income out, it really makes a huge difference. And cutting all of that and making that whole demographic of voters upset 2 months before an election just doesn't make a ton of sense. So I think you're going to see a lot of noise and a lot of folding. And I think you're going to see these big companies ultimately get what they want. Thank you for listening to the Money School Podcast Weekend Edition. I'll be back next week with more content. As always, there's a special Sunday Patreon episode where I go through my top 5 holdings, all of the trades that I made over the last week, and then a deeper dive into the earnings coming up over the next few trading days. Thanks again for listening, and have a great week.